on, guys? Matt up from Middleton Motorsports here. Today up on the dyno we have a 2013 Chevrolet Camaro. So let's go up here and check this thing out. So this car, as you can see, has some aftermarket stuff on it. This is a built short block, so it's got a, this is an LS3 originally, so this is a Camaro SS. It's got an LS3 block, factory block. It's got forged rotating assembly, 4-inch crank, so it's got a stroker crank. Stock bore, so it's like ends up being like a 413 cubic inch engine. The stock LS3 heads are ported. It has a, I think it's like a 223, 243. Not sure who makes the cam, but it's definitely it's Supercharger specific cam. Magnuson 2650. Roto Fab 5-inch cold air. 102 millimeter throttle body. He's got a return style fuel system on it. We are doing a flex fuel tune on it. Long tube headers, 3-inch dual exhaust. So this car is pretty worked over, you know, versus the stock 426 horsepower LS3. This is well over 1,000 horsepower at the crankshaft. Seeing a little over 900 of the wheels. So one thing I do want to touch on though first is pulley combination. So we're at about 15 pounds of boost on this, and I've done a bunch of pulls, and I got this thing pretty much all dialed in. Started on pump gas. We made about 850 on pump gas with real conservative timing, and put some ethanol in the tank. Got the ethanol percentage up to about 70%, and seeing about just over 900 wheel. So we did want to go, and the owner of the car did want to go farther with the boost, but we were struggling with the tensioner, just the tensioner and belt setup. He had a different style tensioner for it that we tried, and I put a 2.75 upper on it, and I could not get the belt. Sorry about the shop still running here, guys, over the noise. I could not get the belt to stay gripped on that supercharger pulley. So this being a Camaro SS, unlike a ZL1, the ZL1s have two belts. So the ZL1, the main drive belt that drives the water pump and the alternator is spaced in further. It's more like Corvette spacing, and then they add I'll call it a third belt, you know, AC drive belt and then supercharger belt. This setup is still the Camaro SS drive, so we're trying to drive everything off one belt. And it becomes kind of a challenge with tensioners at that point. The belt ends up having to be way longer. So I discussed it with the owner, and he's thinking maybe he's just going to leave it like this for now, and maybe go to a ZL1 drive in the future. The goal was to try to make, you know, close to 1,000 wheel, maybe a 4-digit number on it. But unfortunately, we're only able to get 15 pounds of boost, and this is just the pulley combination that we're going to be set with for a little while. So can't go any bigger on the crank, because down here with it already has an overdriven crank ATI balancer, and it gets really close to the water pump here. So you can't really go any bigger on the crank pulley, because the water pump pulley has to be bigger to compensate for the overdrive crank. So these 10-rib kits are cool, but because the crank is bigger, to not overspin everything else, you got to make everything else bigger. Alternator, water pump, different idlers, whatnot. So that's kind of our limitation on this one. 900 wheel is still nothing to sneeze at in a fifth-gen Camaro. It's still a really fast car, especially this is a stick shift car. It's a manual trans. It's still a lot of power. Easily spins the tires. You know, unless you got a drag radial or something on it at pretty much any speed. So for now, this is where we're at. So that's the boost we're going to run on it for now. And he's going to maybe think about reworking some drive stuff this summer, maybe in the fall. So I'm getting it dialed in with this setup as it is. I went back to like a factory style tensioner. This is just a factory LS3 tensioner, and you know, without doing like there's a couple companies that make some really stiff tensioners, but it requires you know, some other stuff reworking, you know, some idlers, and it gets kind of involved versus just doing an LSA drive. So anyway, enough about that. Here's the dyno graph so far. 910. Low 20s for timing, about 22 degrees. So this was last Friday, and I'm just going to do one more just for video's sake, and kind of do a walk around. Car sounds really good with the dual 3-inch and the cam. It's got a nice, you know, that nice pushrod GM chop cam chop to it. So, but I'm really happy with the curve. Curve looks really awesome. Typical Magnuson 2650 curve you see. Real flat torque curve. You know, this is a bigger inch engine, so it's going to make a lot of power down here. You know, 3,500 RPM, we're making 800 foot-pounds. If you compare that to like the GT500 stuff that you'll see on the channel, we're making this kind of power pretty easily with bolt-on stuff on the 85, but not 825 torque. We're like 650 torque. I think my car is like 930 at the wheels and like 640 something torque. So obviously the bigger inch engine is going to put a lot more meat down in the bottom here versus a Coyote-based engine that's, you know, we're spinning to 8,500 and it's making all this power way up in the R's. A little different experience, but you know, these things just feel, you know, they're a heavier car like an S550, and with this kind of torque, it gives them a lot of shove down low for sure. So a lot of fun to drive. So I'm going to set the camera down. We'll rip one more pull on it. Yeah, I think it'll probably be about the same. I did one more last Friday after putting all this back together, and this is actually that run. So I think it made a couple other pulls that made real similar power, and I was kind of playing with some timing and fueling and stuff, just getting some stuff smoothed out, and trying to get as much E85 into it as possible. I think right about 70%. So I'm going to get this thing warmed up. We'll do one more pull on it, and we'll take a look at the data log and the final numbers. So you can see I pretty much backed it up. A little bit more mid-range here. Kind of wavered around back and forth up top, kind of switching back and forth here. But it was within 2 horsepower. I call that repeatable for something making this much power. You know, torque within 5, horsepower within 2. So yeah, that's about where we're going to be with this one for now on that boost level. So a little cooler today. So I'm seeing maybe about 16 pounds of boost today, but obviously the correction factor on the dyno is going to be less too. So, and I can maybe talk about that right now. So I can bring up with the dyno here, I can show the run conditions, and so you can see what happens is the correction factor when it's warmer out. So last Friday it was warm and, you know, more humid. So you can see the I shouldn't say more humid. It was less humid. It was warmer. It was 15 degrees warmer. So the red run was 84 degrees, 31% humidity. So the humidity was good, but it was a lot hotter. So the correction factor was 1.04. So that means that the dyno, on top of just the uncorrected number that's at the roller, the dyno software is adding 4% on top of that. The run I just did, the one you just saw, being 71 degrees, so cooler temperature, a little bit higher on the barrel. Humidity's up a little bit, but not as much to make a difference here. You can see it's adding 2% over the uncorrected, just raw numbers coming out of the dyno. So that's how the correction factor works. It's going to correct to a set standard, which is SAE, which is what I run these in, which is what, when the cars are rated from the factory, any modern car made in the past 30 years uses, or even longer, uses the SAE correction. They've updated it in the past 20 years to the current one that I use here. A lot of dyno guys are going to see, a lot of shops are going to use the standard number up here, which standard correction is something that was used back in like the 60s, before like the when everything had those super inflated. They were using net power standard, which would inflate the power numbers drastically. I use SAE because that's what GM uses, that's what Ford uses, that's what Porsche uses, that's what BMW, all these cars you see, when they're certified for the EPA by the manufacturer, they use an SAE correction at the crankshaft. So that's what we use at the wheels. That's, I believe, is the most accurate. If I ran this thing at standard, it'd probably be making 925 or 930 at the wheels, but that's just not realistic. That's not, so it's something to pay attention to, guys. If you put your car in a dyno, you don't always have to ask for what the actual correction factor is, because that just depends on the weather. It's rainy and chilly here today, so it's kind of weird. We got high humidity, but we got cooler temperatures than we did last Friday, where it was drier, but it was a lot warmer. We got a little higher pressure today. So yeah, so that's how this kind of changes. So sometimes you got to look at this. Sometimes I look at this to kind of see. So I'm mentioning this now because I'm dynoing this on 2 different days. So I always go back, if I'm gonna do this and I'm trying to compare 2 different numbers or 2 different dyno runs that are not the same day, I'm always gonna look at what the correction factor is and kind of look at the weather and kind of be cognizant of what that is. So I know it's nerding out a little bit about this stuff when it comes to dynos. Sometimes you see people ranting and raving all over the internet about how dynos are BS and they don't spit out real numbers. When it comes down to it, the dyno is a tuning tool for us, and it's before and after. So this car obviously just came to me finished, built, ready to be tuned. So I'm just gonna be outputting numbers. Since I couldn't get this all done in one day, you know, one day is this, the next day is that, and I gotta look at the correction factor, and I will look at it. But again, when I say repeatability, because we have different days here, there's gonna be a little bit of a skew on how this thing is correcting, and there's this dyno. I know you guys can take a look at this while we're talking about it. So my dyno stack here this is the dyno stack. So this is what's taking the information from the drum at the wheels and the speed and how fast it's accelerating and all that stuff, and it's taking this little thing. So this is from DynoJet. This is an atmospheric sensor. So this has the temperature, the pressure, and the humidity all built into it. So there's a little sensor inside there, and there's this little fan that draws air in. So I just set it right here. This is just sitting, you know, right next to the car, next to the door here. So we're reading fresh air coming in from outside, and this is the deal. So this is what's determining what our correction is based on the SAE. You know, it's correcting it against the SAE standard. So that's where we're at with this one. So again, I'm pleased with what this is making for the boost level. If we could put another 2, maybe 3 pounds of boost on it with that 275 pulley, I think we would get really close to that 1,000 wheel. Sometimes you struggle with an unported Magnuson, especially since Magnuson changed the casting a couple years back on these 2650s. They moved the foundry somewhere else, and the design that originally, the inlet design on these things that originally was designed, got a little fatter and chunkier in there, and stuff wasn't as streamlined coming in through that inlet. So porting goes a long way on these newer style Magnusons. When these 2650s originally came out, this style and the direct injected like 5th or 6th gen Camaro and C7 Corvette, that style, when those originally came out, we were routinely making 1,000 wheel plus with those without any porting. They updated the casting. They added some material, the foundry changed and the design changed a little bit, and now sometimes we struggle making 1,000 wheel. But still making a lot of power. You can have this thing ported. We can see a 4-digit number eventually if we get the drive system figured out, like I was mentioning in the beginning of the video. So let's go take a look at the dyno data log. Bear with me while I pick up my computer here so we can take a look at the screen. And then again, I'm always fighting with this reflection from the door being open. Okay, so let's center this up. So we can kind of take a look at what I got going on here. So air fuel, that yellow line at the bottom. So you can see where I'm trying to get that kind of that 0.78 to 0.80 lambda, which I'm pretty much spot on. There's a little bit of a rich dip there. That was from whacking the throttle open, that transition fuel. Move up to timing. Here's my knock line. You can see when I first whacked the throttle, I just got a tiny little smidge of 0.2. That's kind of typical. You can kind of see how I'm ramping timing in here. It was really wanting to knock in here. And so I pulled some of the timing out of it down at the bottom. That did not affect the torque number at all down there. It just made the knock sensor happy. So, and you can see I'm pretty quickly ramping the timing in. Now the 2650s, and we'll move up to the boost line here, kind of this pink magenta line. And so you can kind of see how down at 2,000 RPM we have, then that's like 7 pounds of boost. And which is what I really like about these Magnusons. They kind of bridge the gap between the older 3-lobe stuff that just wanted to make, or like a the C7 Corvettes and 6th gen ZL1s, they want to make all the boost down here, and then it just will, you know, when you put headers and airflow mods on them, they'll just kind of taper off, which to me, that's just backwards from what you want. You got a street car, you're driving this thing around, especially a stick shift car, it's nicer to have kind of a ramping boost. So you can kind of see, if I can get around this darn reflection, you can kind of see how, so that's like 7 pounds, and then we'll move to like 4,000 RPM, we're like 12 pounds, I'm gonna call it, at 174, and you can see how it just slowly ramps in, and we're hitting 16 and a half right at the tippy top there at 7,100. And you go back to the dyno graph, it's really starting to flatten out at 65, 6,800, so I'm revving this thing to 72. I think I have the limiter in at 73 or 74. He's got good parts in this thing. He could probably spin it higher, but I don't know that there'd be an advantage to that. So because of this ramping boost curve, and a lot of the times you'll see this with centrifugal cars, a lot of the time with a centrifugal car you'll kind of see a little bit of a dip in the middle too, because the boost is ramping in so hard in the mid-range here that you actually almost have to take some of the timing out of it, especially on pump gas. E85 obviously is what I just ran this on. You can have, with this kind of gradual ramp and boost, you can kind of pretty much just flatten the timing line. That's usually where they like end these LS engines, you know, like that type of timing curve for this type of boost curve. So this is ramping just a little bit. It was making another, holding this thing at 21 degrees all the way out versus 22 up at the top. It made another 5 or 6 wheel with an extra degree up in the tippy top here. So I just left it. It's kind of, for me, that's kind of like hit or miss whether I'm going to leave that or not. Just with the way that the power was kind of flattening out, and adding this in kind of helped it just step up a little bit as the boost curve ramped up. I left it because obviously that's just what the engine liked. So otherwise, yeah, the rest of this, you know, looks, my air fuel's nice and flat. Another thing I always look at in these cars, 2 things I will look at on GM cars that are mass airflow sensor. Now this is still MAF. This is running a 2-bar speed density / mass airflow blended tune. So below 3,000 RPM, it's map and mass airflow. I'm using the map for the transitions. I do zero out some of the predicted fueling, so otherwise you can get some lean spikes at the beginning on some of these big injector cars. But above 3,000 RPM, it's mass airflow only. And these blade style MAFs on these late model GMs, anything Gen 4 and 2008-ish and up, the blade style MAFs work pretty good, especially in a draw through application like this, like NA or this style blower, a Valley style blower like a twin screw or a Roots. They're very accurate. So you can see that my MAF curve here, this purple line, this kind of light purple line, is very nice and smooth. You get into ProCharge stuff, Vortex stuff, where you're doing a blow-through MAF, where you're pushing boost across the mass airflow sensor, and this can start getting really jagged, and then it doesn't work so well all the time. A lot of those applications I will do a speed density only, because it just ends up working better using like a 3-bar map, or even a 4-bar map sensor. But that's one thing I do look at in these cars. I'm always paying attention to the mass air. When you're using a mass airflow curve, you want to make sure that if this mass airflow curve starts getting really jagged, your injector pulse width is going to start doing this, and your air fuel curve is going to start getting really jagged, and you end up with individual combustion events that are lean then rich, where it's jumping back and forth, and the wideband won't really catch that. It might look a little more jagged, but you end up with some kind of inconsistent combustion. So that's really one thing I look at when you start getting these jaggedy pulse width, injector pulse width. So I look at injectors in pulse width. I don't really care about duty cycle, because I know 20 milliseconds at 6,000 RPM is 100% duty cycle. So it's something I just have in my head. I like actually seeing what the injector, the ECU is commanding for a pulse width, so I can see what it's doing. So one thing that I am noticing on this car, and I will let the owner know that I noticed the last 2 pulls, the final pull last week and today, and this one just now, there is a little bit of stepping around on the injector pulse width. And what I'm noticing, and this is another thing to look at, I've seen this in some of the flex fuel stuff, is, and I'll just kind of scroll, you can see how the ethanol content is kind of moving around a little bit. So it was 66. So I know this thing I know I had said 70, but I was seeing 67 before, but you can see how it's moving around. 65, 67, 66, 65, 63, 65, 64. So it's kind of moving around. So even down to 60 there. So I'm going to have him, he's probably going to want to check his wiring and go back over, make sure that everything is grounded and powered properly on that flex fuel sensor, because that should not be jumping around that much. Maybe a percent or two isn't going to affect much, but when it starts jumping around like 3-5%, that's enough to start affecting the fuel by a couple percent. And in a situation like this, you don't want that. So that might be why my injector line is just getting a little funky down in here at the top. So, but otherwise, you know, these are all just these little details that I look at. I know I like talking about this stuff for you guys. If you guys are interested in it, you already kind of saw what this thing put out. I went over what the car was, what the build was, and some of you probably tune out after that. But as far as like kind of how my tuning process goes, is like what I like to share with you guys to kind of see. I've been tuning GMs for over 20 years now, since the beginning of HB tuners, way back over 20 years ago. Just like sharing my experiences, sharing all these different builds that we do, and you know, we still have fun with this stuff even 20 years later. Sometimes it's, you know, it's obviously still work, but it could be, obviously it still gets to be fun sometimes, especially when you get to see this gentleman built this car himself, and he put this all together with the help of, you know, him, and my understanding was maybe a couple friends helped him out, and I think it turned out really nice, you know, very nice under the hood, and you know, well executed. And you like to see the smile on their face when you show them the dyno number and they get to go cruise it around and stab the throttle for the first time. And he did have a Whipple on this car before, and so he's been through a couple iterations of this build, but this is kind of the let's pull the motor and put some forged parts in it and do some more work to it. So yeah, that's going to finish it up for this for now. Like I said, we'll probably do some further stuff on this car in the future with adding some boost. So that'll wrap it up for this one, guys. Appreciate you guys watching the channel, and keep checking back for more. Check our social media and our Instagram for all sorts of other content, and we'll talk to you guys later.